Thank you. That's why it's on instead of my video.
Good to see you. Let's get started. Just before we begin, I wanted to say thank you to Harvey and Ann for sponsoring the shiur today, sponsoring the class in honor of Harvey's 55th bar mitzvah anniversary. Thank God I'm bad at math. But Mazel Tov.
Okay, thank you.
And Mazel Tov, I can't think of a better way to celebrate your bar mitzvah anniversary than learning Torah. So
Thank you.
To you and Ann. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
And the class is also sponsored anonymously, just as a general Hakar Satov Kol HaKavod to all that have been involved in keeping the community together, which is certainly more than just the rabbis and the staff. The entire community has really done an unbelievable job. So we thank everyone, and it's just, we'll keep working together to continue to build an amazing community, even if it means building it virtually. All right. The Mishnah we're holding in right now, the 8th chapter of Masechet Shabbos, it picks up from where we ended our last conversation. And the last conversation ended with some of the general principles of carrying things on Shabbos. We discussed food items and the like. So the Mishnah picks up with more details, and I want to discuss more something we hinted to last time, which is we discussed some of the principles of carrying on Shabbos and the prohibition of carrying on Shabbos, and that's what we're going to pick up with today. So the Mishnah says the following: Hamotze yayin, someone who carries wine. I mean, you could imagine that I would imagine that would be a common scenario. Someone's going to a friend on Shabbos for a meal. They bring a bottle of wine with them. We're obviously talking about in a place without an Eruv, where the prohibition of carrying would apply. So what's the minimum size of carrying wine that would be prohibited on Shabbos? So hamotzi yayin kedei mezigas hakos. So the amount of wine that would be necessary in order to do mezigas hakos. So mezigas hakos is referring to that back in the times of the Mishnah, the wine that they produced in the wineries were very, very strong. They in order for you to be able to drink it, in order for it to become edible, you needed to water it down with 3 parts water to 1 part wine. In order for it to even be edible. So how much of the unedible, non-drinkable wine would one need to carry on Shabbos for you to be liable? The enough that would be necessary. If you were to mix it, then it would be able to create wine. If it's less than that, then it's not significant enough for you to be liable. Chalav, what about milk? Kedei megia, enough that you would swallow in 1 gulp. Devash, again, like we spoke about last time, these are all items that have different minimum amounts that would make it a davar chashuv, something substantial. And that's why we're going through all these different details, because it's bringing out just how over and over again the same idea, which is that depending on the item, it's going to have a different minimum size, because it all is based on the basic principle that it needs to be considered a davar chashuv. Devash, what about honey? Kedei litain al hakatis. Honey is enough to be placed on a scab. So it was used for medicinal purposes. Shemen kedei lasoch aver katan. Oil, enough in order for you to be able to heal. To soak a small limb. Now, what's the smallest limb that we have, on our body that you would soak in oil, or you would rub oil on in order to for medicinal purposes? So the smallest limb for something like that, the bartender says, would be a toe. Now, not just any toe, but it would be the pinky toe. Right, it would be the smallest toe, would be the smallest limb on your body you would use for something like an oil-based lotion. But the Bartanura takes it a step further, and he says that it's not just the smallest, toe on your body, but rather it's the smallest limb, the smallest toe on a child's body, a newborn baby's body would be the smallest limb. That's what the Bartanura says. Okay, like I mentioned before, we're going to have to take a 30-second pause because the baby is now being put in the crib. Give me just 1 second. I love this. I love that we have to fight in order to be able to learn Torah during this time. Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay, so we just said that, the Bartanura said that the smallest aver, the smallest limb, would be that of a small child, the pinky toe of a small child. So that amount of oil, which is a drop, is what one would have to carry in order to be liable on Shabbos. Mayim, what about water? Again, it's for some sort of a medicinal purpose that you use it for some sort of eye medication. However amount of water you would need for that is what you would be liable if you were to carry on Shabbos. Ushar kol hamashkim b'revius. Then the Mishnah says all other liquids, the minimum size would be a revius, which is a discussion exactly how much is a revius. Presumably a revius will just use the measurement of about 3 ounces. Okay, so about 3 ounces, if one were to carry that on Shabbos, they would violate the prohibition of carrying on Shabbos. Okay. V'chol ha-shopachin b'revius. And any liquids that are really liquids that you would use for soaking different things, that would be the amount of a revius as well. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Kulan b'revius. Rabbi Shimon says he doesn't get this whole, you use different minimum amounts for different liquids. He says all of the liquids all have the same size, which is a revius, which is, like we said, about 3 ounces. That's the amount that if you were to carry in Rosh Hashanah, you would be liable. But lo amru kol hashiyurin halalu, and says Reb Shimon, all of these different sizes, it depends, like we said before. Oil would be the small of a baby's toe, the size of the heel of a baby's toe. Milk would be the amount that you swallow. All of these different minimum measurements are only ela lematznihen, would only be for those that are in the business of storing these things. Okay, so if you are someone that let's say a dairy farmer, okay? So a dairy farmer, it matters for him how much milk he's carrying, because every drop of milk matters to a dairy farmer, okay? If you're someone that's in the business of producing, ointments for people, for scabs and things like that, so then it matters how much honey you have. But for the average person, honey or milk, or if it's anything less than 3 ounces, it's pretty insignificant, and therefore you would not be liable on Shabbos. So I want to discuss, exactly what it is that Reb Shimon and the Rabbanan are arguing about. What is the machlokas over here between Reb Shimon? Here you go. Between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim. What are they really arguing about? So Rashi and the Bartanura both say the following, that what we're arguing about over here, and I'll quote to you what Rashi says. Rashi says the following: Lo ne'emru shiurin sheba Mishnah, that these measurements that we find in our Mishnah don't exist. Ala l'mitziehen levad, only exist for those that are carrying. Why, says Rashi, v'chazar hamatzniya v'hotziu chayiv. And then if someone who stores these things were to go and carry them, okay, then they would be liable. Aval shar kol adam, however, all other people, shehotziu eno chayiv, are not going to be liable. So according to Rashi, since I'm not a dairy farmer, if I carry the amount that was listed in our Mishnah of milk, which is the amount that you swallow, which is much less than 3 ounces, it's probably more like, half an ounce or an ounce, and that's the amount that I swallow. So then that's the amount that I carry on Shabbos. So I'm not going to be liable on Shabbos. And it's only for the dairy farmer that if they were to fit into this mold, they would be liable. So it seems, though, it seems like then that the machlokes between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim is, if I, who is not a dairy farmer, wants to be able to keep that amount of milk, and it's something that's important to me, which is why I'm carrying it into the public domain. Why else am I carrying it? I'm not carrying it just to have extra weight. I'm carrying it because I want it. So is the fact that I am giving chashivas, I'm giving a sense of importance to this item, does that make it something that is going to be significant enough that I'd be liable if I carried it? Or do we say that no, it doesn't matter what you think, it matters what the whole world thinks. And if the whole world views you as a crazy person, what are you doing carrying around a tiny little bit of milk with you, right? You're a crazy guy. So it doesn't matter what you think. You're batla daita etzel kol adam. Whatever you think in this context is meaningless because you are the exception. So if you're a dairy farmer, okay, we get it why every drop of milk matters to you. Or if you're someone that's working in creating pharmaceuticals, okay, so we get why, different types of liquids would matter to someone like you. But for the average person, that size of milk or that small amount of honey or that small amount of oil is meaningless. And therefore, just because it matters to you, says Reb Shimon, that is not going to make it that you're going to be liable. However, the rabbis view that no, that's enough to make it liable, to make you liable. And this is not just said by Rashi, but in fact, the Ran, Rabbeinu Nissim, who has a famous commentary on many Masechtas in Shas. It's really a commentary on the Rif. Remember, we've talked about in the past where the Gemara is not necessarily a work that one would paskin straight from. Why? Because if I want to know what bracha you make on rice, and I try and figure out because, it's a question about a bracha, so let me open up Tractate Brachos. The answer should be in there. So fine, I see when I open up Tractate Brachos, there's a lot of things that are discussed. So let me find where the brachos of food are discussed. So that's in the 6th chapter. And I open up the 6th chapter and I look for the Mishnah about orez. I look for the Mishnah about rice, and I see that there are a million different discussions about rice and whether or not the Mishnah really meant rice in the first place. And it goes off all these different discussions, but really the Gemara is a collection of discussions, not a book that is supposed to tell you what to do, but rather for you to engage in the discussion to understand why we do what we do. That was why when the Rambam came along and distilled the entire Talmud into a codified form of Jewish law that's organized, something that you could easily navigate. But before the Rambam did that, the Rif, Rabbeinu Alfasi, who lived in the 10th century, was a Sephardic Rishon. So he did that, but did not restructure the entire Talmud like the Rambam did. He followed the same order of the Talmud, but he condensed the Talmud into these basic halachic statements that, at the end of the discussion, this is what we say to do. So he doesn't bring down the whole discussion. He just says, this is what we say to do. The Ran will bring into the Rif, not just the Rif's opinion, which is what the Rif does, but he'll tell you what the Rif says, what Rashi says, what Tosfos says, what the Ramban says, what all of the different Rishonim have to say on the matter. That is that's what the Ran brings to the table. So the Ran writes the following. He says, when it comes to a regular person, lo mechayev ela b'shir gadol kigon revius lamashkin. According to Reb Shimon, the reason why you're going to be liable for the average person when you carry out, let's say, wine, is only if you carry out a revius. Why? Because less than a revius is not something that's substantial enough. Less than 3 ounces is not substantial enough. The Savar Reb Shimon to be in Shabbos, because according to Reb Shimon, when it comes to the laws of Shabbos, it needs to be davar harai l'chol adam. It needs to be something that is applicable to every single person. Even when it comes to a very, very rich person, who you would think that that's such a person, the 1% would be the person that is the exception. And therefore, it should just follow the rove. It should follow what applies to most people, not what is all-encompassing, what applies to all people. Below Azlin and Basaruba. Says Reb Shimon, no, we do not follow the majority. Rather, we follow what every single person in the world. Now, when we say every single person in the world, there's obviously going to be this one exception to the rule. But we're talking about every single demographic in the world. Every single demographic in the world views less than 3 ounces of water to be something that is quite insignificant. Even someone who's very, very, very poor, 3 ounces of water is something that is insignificant. Are they going to pass it up when they don't have anything to drink? Of course not. But at the end of in the grand scheme of things, even such a person would view such a small amount of liquid as not something that's very significant, and therefore, if you were to carry it on Shabbos, you would not be liable. The question is, where did we come up with this? Where did Reb Shimon get this idea from? Or really, we can ask the question of why is it that Rashi and the Ran are pushing this agenda to explain Reb Shimon, that Reb Shimon's argument on the rabbis is such that on Shabbos, we have to see what all people do. Where did he get that from? So let's take a look. So the Rashba, I think we mentioned this Rashba last time, but it's important for us to review this Rashba. There's a Rashba in Bava Basra on Daf Nun Hey that tells us something that is a major chiddush. The Rashba says that when it comes to hotzah, when it comes to carrying on Shabbos, there is no concept of chetzi shir. The concept of chetzi shir does not apply on Shabbos with regard to hotzah. What is chetzi shir? Chetzi shir is based on a Gemara in Yuma. The Gemara in Yuma on Daf Ayin Dalet has a discussion about, let's say the Torah says that I am not allowed to eat meat and milk. Lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imo. I'm not allowed to have a mixture between meat and milk. So what's the amount of meat and milk combo that one is not allowed to eat? So the Rambam makes very clearly, it says very clearly that it needs to be a kazayas that can be eaten b'chadei achilas pras. Basically, it needs to be an olive size amount of meat and milk. So a bite of a cheeseburger that you eat within a time period of about 4 minutes. The amount of that's the size of an olive that you eat within the period of 4 minutes, that would be a biblical prohibition of eating meat and milk, and you would receive lashes for doing such a thing. The Gemara then has a discussion about, okay, but let's say I had half of a bite or a nibble. I tasted it. I didn't have a full bite. I want to see what the craze, what the whole craze of Carl's Jr. is all about. I pass it every single day while I drive to teach at Sky High. I want to know what the craze is, and so I want to have a little nibble. So is there still a biblical prohibition of having a little nibble? So the Gemara has a machlokes between Reb Shimon and between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish says that nope. There is no biblical prohibition of having just a little nibble. Rabbi Yochanan says that there is still a biblical prohibition of having a little nibble. Are you going to get lashes for it? No. But there is a biblical prohibition. Because he quotes a pasuk where the Torah says, Kol basar, that any amount of non-kosher food you eat, there is a prohibition. And then on top of the pasuk, he also gives a svara. He gives a logical inference to back him up. He says that what's going to happen if you have a nibble? You're going to end up having a bite. You're going to end up having the full shear. So therefore, the Torah prohibits one from even having just a little nibble, lest you come to having a more significant amount. We paskin like Rabbi Yochanan. There is one opinion that's found in the Chacham Tzvi. The Chacham Tzvi says that we assume that we do paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, but only in the realm of non-kosher food, not in any other area of the Torah. However, most of the Rishonim, including Rashi, in Shabbos on Daf Ayin Daled, says that that is not the way we paskin. We paskin that this concept of chetzi shir applies to all areas of Torah, meaning that if you were to, let's say, cook, a very, very tiny amount of food on Shabbos, okay, you were to cook, a small little tiny, a quarter of a grape, like a tiny little seemingly insignificant amount, you were to cook that on Shabbos, that would be, according to Rashi, according to pretty much every single Rishon, that would be a Torah prohibition on Shabbos. The problem is that there is a Tosefta. The Tosefta says in Maseches Beya, the Tosefta says the following, that if someone were to write, someone were to take out a pen and paper on Shabbos and write down one letter, they wrote the letter Aleph on Shabbos, that is only a rabbinic prohibition. That's not a Torah prohibition. Now, I thought we just said before that if you were to do half or less than half, even the smallest amount of a Torah prohibition on Shabbos, then that's still a Torah prohibition. Are you going to be liable to bring a carbon? No, but there's still a Torah prohibition. We said before, if you were to cook up a tiny little piece of a carrot or something like that, that would be a Torah prohibition on Shabbos. You wouldn't be chayav a carbon, but that's still a Torah prohibition according to Rabbi Yochanan. That's how we paskin. It's quoted in the Rambam. So then, what's the deal? Why does the Tosefta tell me then that if someone were to write only one letter on Shabbos, so then that would only be a rabbinic prohibition? Why wouldn't that be a Torah prohibition? The Torah's Kohanim, by the way, which is another piece of Tanaic literature, the Torah's Kohanim argues on the Tosefta. But the Tosefta says, no, it's only a rabbinic prohibition. Where is this from? Why is why would kosev, why would writing one letter be an exception to the rule? So the Totsos Chaim, Rabbi Menachem Zemba, gives the following explanation. Rabbi Menachem Zemba was unbelievable. He was not a rabbi by trade. Rabbi Menachem Zemba I think he worked in furs. He had some sort of or I think it may be textiles, but he worked in some sort of manufacturing plant. And he happened to be, he was a relatively wealthy businessman. But where he gained fame was not in his material wealth, but was in his Torah knowledge and his analytical ability. He was an unbelievable Talmud Chacham. The Zera Avram, who was one of the major poskim in Europe before World War II, has correspondence between him and Rabbi Menachem Zemba that, he basically is writing to this businessman in order to get advice in paskening serious shilas. And we're talking about one of the biggest poskim. We're talking about the Zera Avram is writing to Rabbi Menachem Zemba, who, like I said before, was a businessman. And he didn't even go to the working man's kollel. Rabbi Menachem Zemba, when the Nazis came, they unfortunately killed they killed many Gedolei Yisrael, along with the 6 million, and among them was Rabbi Menachem Zemba, and because of that, the Nazis actually destroyed his writings. There at one point in history had volumes of writings from Rabbi Menachem Zemba. Today, we have, unfortunately, very little. We have those correspondence from the Zera Avram, and we have another sefer, which is called Totsos Chaim, right over here, the Totsos Chaim. So the Totsos Chaim was written by Rabbi Menachem Zemba, and really what the book is about is the Malacha of Hotzah, which is what we're discussing. So he discusses this question on the Tosefta, that how could it be that the Tosefta says that if someone were to only write one letter on Shabbos, that it would only be a rabbinic prohibition. He gives another example even. He quotes from Rashi, that Rashi says that, let's say someone, we spoke about in the first chapter, that Hotzah has two parts to it. There's two aspects. There's, when you need to go carry something, so you take it from your house and you bring it outside. So those were two steps. You lifted it up from one domain and you part it and you put it down in another domain, right? The transference has its point of dispatch and its its point of departure and where it lands. So let's say someone were to only do one of those things. Okay, let's say there was a scenario where you lifted something, right? You stuck it outside of your window, but then you never released it and you brought it back in. So you did akira, you brought it outside of its first domain, but you never left it in the other domain. So Rashi says that that's not even a rabbinic prohibition. That's totally mutter. Why? I thought that we just said before that that's doing chetzi shir. That's, hotzah, in order to violate it, you need to do both things. You just did less than both things, but you still did something. So therefore, that should be a Torah prohibition. It should be no different than taking the little tiny bite of the cheeseburger. So what's the difference? So Menachem Zemba explains the follows. He says he writes as follows. He says, he writes the following. V'ayin me'iri sham diyesh chiluk bein chetzi shir lechetzi malacha. He quotes from the Meiri that there's a difference between doing less than the malacha, meaning doing if the minimum is 50, you do 25. There's doing less, and then there's doing chetzi malacha. There's a difference in less of the minimum versus less of the action itself. Akira below hanacha. If you were to lift something out of one domain and not transfer it into another domain, that's not called chetzi shir. What is that called? That's called chetzi malacha. You didn't complete the action at all, meaning you never actually did the malacha of violating chotzah on Shabbos. You never actually did the malacha of violating writing on Shabbos if you only wrote one letter. Versus if you do less than a shear, you cooked a carrot a certain amount, okay? Even though the carrot was so small that it didn't fit the minimum requirements of you needing to bring a carbon, but at the end of the day, do you have a cooked carrot? Yes. So you can't say that is, I didn't do the malacha of cooking. Yes, you did do the malacha of cooking. You didn't do enough of it for it to be considered hashiv for you to have to bring a carbon. But did you cook something? Of course you cooked something. Whereas when it comes to if writing one letter or cooking or carrying something, not in its full way, that's not even called doing the malacha at all. He says that the Rashbam in Bava Basra brings this home. The Rashbam says the following. The Rashbam explains, why is it that we need a minimum shear on carrying with regard to chotzah? Why do you need a minimum? Just say that, carrying is prohibited. So he says, because the Torah prohibits doing malacha on Shabbos, that is a maleches machasheves, that is doing anything that is thoughtful as an artisan, that you know what you're doing and you follow through with what you're doing. And if you do anything less than that, then that is not called doing maleches machasheves. And therefore, you can't even call that doing a malacha on Shabbos. Now we can get back to our Mishnah. Why is it that the Rishonim are saying that we need the das of every single person, meaning that, we don't follow the majority in terms of how much wine the average person needs, but rather it's at every single person. And therefore, if you're the exception to the rule, that you decide, I'm going to carry around a small amount of milk with me, that's not going to be a biblical prohibition on Shabbos. I thought that we still have a concept of chetzi shir. So comes along the Totzolos Chaim and he says, because when I carry less than what every single person in the world carries, that by definition is not called doing the malacha of hotzah. Because the malacha of hotzah needs to be fitting into the realm of maleches machasheves. And therefore we need to view what is the way the world defines this malacha of hotzah. This malacha, this category of work called carrying. Anything less than that would not be part of part of the biblical prohibition, and it's for that reason that we have to look to see what every single person in the world is doing. It's not enough to look at the majority. You have to look at what the entire world is doing, what every single demographic does, how every single demographic treats these different liquids. And since, generally speaking, anything less than 3 ounces is just something that is completely insignificant, so just because you're doing it does not make it any more chashuv, unless you're a dairy farmer. A dairy farmer needs every single ounce of milk. The person running the winery, every ounce of wine matters. And that's why when it comes to that type of a person, there's an objective chashivos, there's an objective importance that's given to this object. And therefore, if you were to carry it on Shabbos, that would be a Torah prohibition. Okay, we'll stop here. I could hang on for a couple more minutes if anyone has any questions. Or if you just want to schmooze.